anybody used to mine, so I won't either. And I can be pretty brief with what we're asking our Colcord School District. It's pretty straightforward. The last couple of years, we've put to our voters the potential to pass bonds for storm shelters and additional buildings. And I wanted to give a little bit background of why. What's the why? Why are we trying to pass bonds? Well, we passed a bond a few years ago to build this gymnasium. And that bond is nearing an end. And since then, we've grown significantly. In fact, the last 3 years, we've grown by 200 students. That's a lot for a small school. And what it causes is the need for additional classroom space. When you think about adding buildings, I was talking to a superintendent today, one of the laws is any building you build in a school now that's over 200 capacity actually has to be a storm shelter. That's the new law that's passed. So we don't have storm shelters in the area, so that's something we were looking at. And as we looked at building new buildings, we wanted to build storm shelters because that's a tremendous need. Well, one of the ways that you would want to offset that in funding is the FEMA money. We've heard the word FEMA, or FEMA, what that means for storm shelters. Well, 2 years ago when we tried to pass that bond, we were asked by many people, do you have FEMA money? The answer was no. The reason why we didn't is because we wasn't even able to write FEMA grants because the Delaware County Management Mitigation Plan had expired. And without that plan, you can't write a FEMA grant. That has to be in place because you're doing it through that plan. Well, fast forward a couple of years, those bonds failed, and I think everything happens for a reason. I really do. We still have needs here in Colcord as far as classroom space, safety for our children. So what our board has looked at, our administration has looked at very seriously is what can we do now? I'm happy to report that the Delaware County Management Mitigation Plan is in the process of being updated. In fact, I think very soon it will be approved, maybe within the year, which is amazing. That's great. There's been a lot of work put into that. We're a part of that process as Colcord Public Schools. We've been to every meeting, in fact. So what our board talked about doing was, let's write FEMA grants now. Let's look for that funding for storm shelters and additional classroom space. So our Board of Education last fall partnered with Real Grant Solutions out of Corpus Christi, Texas. The lady's name is Ann Danish, and her department writes FEMA grants. They're grant writers. So we've hired them to write our FEMA grants. And we're about 2/3 of the way that process. It's a very involved process to write FEMA grants. And as soon as the Delaware County Mitigation Plan is approved, our grants will go in. And if that happens this summer, if that happens this fall, our FEMA money is going to go in. And then you wait. You wait for that money to be approved. The lady said, I almost guarantee you will get FEMA money eventually for your projects. And we're wanting to look at the same things we did before, which is a building at the elementary that would house a cafeteria and classrooms, that would be a storm shelter, and a building over here at our mid-high that would be a new ag building that would also be a storm shelter. We can't do those right now. We've looked at that before to ask for our patrons, let's go ahead and do it, but it would have required a pretty large tax increase. It was about 15%. And we had the need, so we felt led to go ahead and put that to our community. But it did not pass. As you all know, bonds for schools require a 60% passage. The mentioning of the sheriff, I believe it only just needs 50%, 51% pass for a sales tax. It doesn't require 60%. Am I right on that, David? Okay. But a bond requires 60%, so it's got to be that almost super majority. So The board talked about it, we've talked about it as administration, we're still looking at the needs that we have in the school district. And one of the things that was on our original needs assessment was the renovation of our middle school. Middle school was built in 1995. It's really too small for us now. What we would like to do in this bond is to add on to it. We've got some of this literature out where you can see what we're wanting to do with it. Our monies are still very limited in a bond, especially if we look at a bond that we say, we're not going to require of you additional taxes. We're just wanting you to extend the bond. If you extend the bond, we'll take that money and we'll renovate the middle school. And I wanted to explain the phases of what the Board of Education, our administration team wants to try to accomplish our needs, but our needs are still here. So this bond, the middle school renovation, would be an addition onto the south side of it, which would be a new library and offices, and a secure vestibule for entrance like our high school and elementary are. So it would be a much safer entrance. We would also have a counselor's office. We are very pleased to announce that we've just recently hired a middle school counselor and an elementary counselor. We've not ever had a counselor for each one of those sites. So we're really, really excited that we have what we feel like a strong counseling department, which we know that that's a tremendous need nowadays. So we're excited about that. But what that does is we're housing our library in one of our classrooms now. And so if we build a new library, it's going to open up and add us a classroom. A man mentioned to me before, when we were looking at this, we had looked at it a different way. We were going to actually take a classroom and put the offices in it and create a secure vestibule. And it was thinking more safety-wise. They said that, why would you do that? Because you're actually losing the classroom. Aren't you growing? Said, yeah, we are growing. You're right. We don't need to lose the classroom. So this is a different way of looking at it. This is an addition, so we don't lose a classroom. We're actually going to gain a classroom. Potentially two, because the library's portion of it here can double as a classroom as well. So we're actually going to gain a couple of classrooms. Now, our large amount of our growth has been in our elementary, our pre-K through 5th grade. That is now aging up into the middle school. And our middle school right now is the current area of need. The other things that we've had to do, because in the last 2 years, those kids are still coming in. We gained 60 this year alone from last year. We've had to purchase and set up and lease purchase modulars. We've got 2 modular buildings, and I'm sure you've all saw them as you've driven across campus. We've put 2 modular buildings over here behind the Hornets of Character office. We're going to house a multi-handicap classroom in one and our pre-K in another. And so that'll free up 2 classrooms in our elementary and then 2 classrooms in our rock building. We actually currently have our multi-handicap and 2 classrooms of our rock building. So what we're planning on doing now is make our rock building a 6th grade center. It'll have 3 classrooms for 6th grade, and it frees up space in our current middle school for only 2 grades. So we actually have the space to do that in the immediate. If we keep growing, which all trends show that we're speeding up instead of slowing down in growth. It's a good problem to have, but you have growing pains as a result. So what our board said is, so why not look at in the immediate, while we're writing our FEMA grants for additional classrooms and storm shelters, if we can extend the bond and renovate the middle school, we gain our classroom space, we make it safer, it updates the building. And we'll put that out to patients to see if they're interested in supporting it. And they were adamant that we did not want to increase the mills. Keep the mills the same, so it's a no tax rate increase. It does not increase your taxes. And I asked Jordan Smith from Stephen L. Smith, he's talking with our bonding company. He's here with us to help answer any questions that you might have toward that, or any other questions. I want to answer any questions that you might have. But I wanted to give a background on the why. Why are we doing this? Because FEMA's going to take a few years to get approved. Anyone that knows anything, Mary's here. She knows about FEMA, how FEMA money works. She could maybe help answer some questions in that regard. Once our FEMA grants go in, then we'll have to wait for them to pass. And here's how FEMA works. Once it gets approved, we get a letter that says, all right, you've been approved for your FEMA money. You can start on your building. You've got to wait till you get that letter before you can start building the building. That FEMA money will pay for 75% of the construction for the storm shelters portion. That's a 75% grant. That's a lot. So we can bond for the other 25%, and then we can build our building. Well, that 25%, let's say the two buildings are going to cost $8 million to build. 75% of that would be $6 million. That's how much FEMA would actually pay, and we would only just be out for $2 million to come up with it. Well, if we looked at that down the road 3 or 4 years, this bond is coming off that we're extending, and we could actually build 2 storm shelters potentially for, again, a no tax rate increase. And we can have all of our needs. So we've listened to our community as we surveyed and we tried to do this. And again, in our defense, we couldn't write FEMA before. We're just now able to write FEMA. But we're doing it. We've invested quite a bit of our money just to hire a grant writer to be successful in it. So I wanted to point that out, that we've listened. We wanted to have FEMA money to build storm shelters and build our buildings. But it's just a financially intelligent thing to do, because we don't want to strap our taxpayers. I'm a taxpayer at Gulfport as well, and I don't necessarily want to pay more property taxes to be able to do this. But this is a huge investment for the future of our kids. I predict we will continue to grow. I've looked at the trends of the last 5 years. We started growing about 5 years ago a little bit, and the last 2 years we've sped up dramatically. Instead of slowing down, we're actually speeding up in growth. I talked to some local leaders and asked them about economic development in the area, and just, what are your thoughts? And there's a lot of interest in building in the area. There's a lot of interest in moving into the area. So their prediction was, I think you're going to keep growing. I think you're going to continue to have growth with your kids. The other thing that's happening is this. And I think it was in 2020, January 1, 2020, the legislature passed an open transfer law that stated that anyone can transfer into another district if they have capacity and they're in good standing with their current school. Then the receiving school doesn't have a choice. They just have to take them. They may live in Little Kansas or Watts or Westfield. No matter where they live, they could come to Gulfport and go to school. What's happened over the last year and a half is we've had a large influx of transfers because they want to come to Gulfport school. I'm not being braggadocious, but they're wanting to choose Gulfport as their educational process for their children. And it's maxed out a lot of our capacities. And we don't even have the ability in the transfer side of it to take more kids in some grades because they're completely maxed out. And then with what happens is when you actually do get move-ins, it's a double-edged sword. So you might have, for example, we have a 65 kid capacity in the 6th grade. We've got currently 66 kids. So we couldn't take any more transfers. And that's fine. But it doesn't stop move-ins. They still come. And you're up to 68, and 70, and 72, and 74. You gotta have teachers. And teachers gotta have a classroom to teach the kids. We've actually added, I don't even have the number, but we've added 8 new staff members this last year alone, just to be able to classroom all the kids that we've had in the increase. You think about 200 kids at 20 per class. It's a lot of teachers, a lot of classrooms. And it's a good problem to have. We want to have a great education for our kids. We want them to be safe as we possibly can. Sheriff mentioned, I do want to speak to that real quick. An SRO was something that I was very passionate about 4 years ago. I just felt like it was a tremendous need in our school district. And we figured out a way to try to do it. It's been tough. It's been tough. As he mentioned, some school districts already employ SROs, or in our case, a security guard. He's not actually a school road officer. Because by definition, that's when you're partnering with local PD, and they're providing, or the county, and they're provide an officer with a memorandum of understanding. We actually have leveraged some federal funds called Title IV and Title II, where we're actually paying for our security guard codes. It's a safety federal grant, if you will. It come out 3 years ago. Problem with that is it can go away in a year. It's subject to the federal government, federal regulation. So we stick a little bit of our Title II in that to create some of that salary, and then we leverage that. We've been very blessed to have that, but it can go away tomorrow, and we not receive that money next year. And that federal funds changes all the time. So we may very well need to leverage that SRO in the future. And honestly, we're a pretty spread out district. We've got, an elementary over here 2 blocks away, or a block away from a mid and high. It would be wonderful to have two, have one in one area and another in the other, to make sure our kids are safe. So, I'd love to have an SRO provided by the county to me. When he mentioned it to me, I'm like, yeah, that's a no-brainer to me. If I'm just looking at it as a superintendent for our kids, but I do understand the implications of a sales tax. I understand that because we've already went through looking at a not a sales tax increase, but a millage increase, locally for bonds, even when we're looking at something as important as storm shelters and safety. So I wanted to give you a background on where we've come from in the last couple of years, where we're currently at right now, why we're asking for this, and then our plans for the future. We do have a plan. We're not just willy-nilly saying, well, this is what we're going to do right now and we'll figure out tomorrow. We actually have a plan for tomorrow and what we want to try to accomplish next, but not having to burden our taxpayers with an additional amount of money, like a big jump of a 15% tax increase. You'd have noticed that. We talked about what that was, but it still would have been noticeable. And there would be some that paid more than others. If you own more land or you have more, you pay more than others, of course. So I understand that. We all understand that. That's why the sales tax is a little bit better, because everybody that buys anything in our county then essentially helps pay for that. So it's better than property tax increase, for sure. So,
Hey, Bud,
yes, sir.
how long a period do you plan on extending this bond?
This one will be how many years will this one go out?
So the bonds, we sell them through 27, and then there's a couple of years, basically about 8 years. And it's going to trickle down those last 3 years. So
It's from how long?
8 years total.
8 years.
Yep. So this bond would be an 8-year, we're only selling them through 27. So you're only selling them for 4. But those last 4 years, it's going to trickle down. And what Mr. Simmons has kind of alluded to is your problems haven't changed in the last 2 years. You still need the safe rooms, you still need the classrooms. So this bond plan with this 4-year window, you can come back, couple with those FEMA grants, add those in at no tax increase at that time, and continue on should that be the course of action.
The ask is your taxes stay the same.
Right. So how is this a no tax increase? How does this not change our tax rate? In 2010, when we voted the bond for the gym, we were at 17, 18 mils, and you can see I didn't go all the way back to 2010. I started 10 years ago from today. So 2013, this was the actual tax rate that you paid over the life of that gym. This red line, or this mark right here, the blue, is the gym taxes. The red represents this proposed. And you can see right here, 3 years out, basically in 27, is when that starts dropping.
So if we don't pass another bond,
timing
it
of
really
this-
just start going down.
One of the things that was important, again, along the lines of your needs haven't changed. We're just trying to find a different way to fund those needs. FEMA, that federal grant. Can we come in here with that FEMA grant, continue on, it's a future vote, but continue on with that FEMA grant at 75 cents on the dollar. And so this bond was designed under that direction. Our needs haven't changed. We still need the safe room. We still need the additional space. We're just trying to find somebody else to help pay for it, i.e. FEMA. But we still have some immediate needs today that we'd like to accomplish if we can without changing the taxes. So that's
Actually,
basically,
you extend them out, keep paying the same as what you are right now.
yeah, the other side of the bar chart. So this is the exact same information, it's just a different graphic. This has the millage rates over the life of the bond. So in 2013, you were at 17.28, 19.1, 18.2, 19, 17, 17, 17, 17, 18.1 or 2 right in here. We're keeping consistent in that exact same millage rate with this proposed bond.
Other
Now-
questions?
One thing I may point out, we talked about sales tax, we talked about property tax. I think most people know, but I get it from time to time. Why can't we do sales tax for the school project? The school board does not have the authority to ask for a sales tax question. That has to come from the city or the county. So your board, even if they wanted to, they don't have the legal authority to put it out on sales tax. I will speculate, and I didn't even interrupt you, I will speculate, I don't know that sales tax would be able to pay if you were just funding it locally here, so.
Okay, I wish the senator was stepping around, and he's still there. What's a realistic thought of consolidating Mosley into Concord with that further enter? I'll give you an example. I pay taxes in Mosley, I pay taxes in Concord. I pay both places, but I don't get to vote on anything at Concord. That is wrong, Senator, it needs to be fixed.
And that's something that we as Awkward Public Schools can't change.
I understand that. He can't.
I will say, Mosley's a K through 8 school, and they sort of feed into our schools. The kids, when they graduate, Mosley can go anywhere they want and stay at Oklahoma. That's their choice. The vast majority of them elect to come to Concord, and we love to serve them. Because we consider them our kids too, you know.
I mean, we get a lot of grade school kids from Mosley coming over here.
There have some transferred over, yeah, I wouldn't call it a lot, there has been some, yeah. And they're transferred. They're still living in Mosley district, but they're transferred here.
So I will say, if Mosley were to consolidate with you, then that tax would be divided equally across the entire new district. So that Concord Mosley consolidated, if you will, ABC school.
In my case, I would get a vote on anything.
You get to vote, yes,
At
yes.
that point now, I don't get a choice.
Sure, sure. No, and that, we get that comment from time to time. Again, that's a
If it did
relationship.
happen, it would essentially double our bonding capacity. Because the valuation of Mosley district is almost the same, even though it's a fraction of the size of Falkwood district, because it's west side only, so the value's higher, the land's worth like their words. I'm not saying that to insult anyone, it's just, that's what it is. Their valuation is a little bit less than ours, but it's darn near the same. It would increase our bonding capacity by double. And so what we could accomplish in
Yeah.
bonding would be significantly more, double.
Likely what would happen, instead of this being up here, it's gonna be right here, and that's the tail end of it, which is gonna give you capability to couple with that FEMA grant faster.
Maybe, additional funds for other things. And it's still the same tax rate, too. Not asking for more. That's the big change in this bond than from the others. Not asking for more, not asking you to bump your taxes up. Just keep it the
Right.
same. That's what we're asking for. And I wanted to make sure that we educate folks on that. And that's why I asked, Jordan to come all the way from Tulsa tonight to answer any questions that may be a little more too technical for me. But, we didn't want to increase taxes. When we started out looking at potentially extending our bond the first time, we didn't want to do that. But we felt like this is what we needed to propose, and I think it's a process that we go through. I've learned a lot. I've made mistakes along the way. Maybe we should have waited till now to do this while the FEMA's ready to be written. But I do think everything happens for a reason. We get a more heartbeat of what the community is interested in and what they would support as we go through the process. And I think that we know where we need to go with it right now. And I think this is a reasonable ask. It's not ask for more, but to ask you to keep it the same. to support our kids, because this is an investment in the future. I know you understand that. I think everybody does understand that. And I want to say this too. Our school, you know, we grow, you know, some people might ask, well, why don't you do it this way, or why don't you do it that way? I would love to talk to anyone about our finances, our curriculum, our staff. You can come talk to me anytime. Pick up the phone, call me. I love to talk shop with you. I'll show you our books. I'll show you everything we do is public record anyway. Just like the sheriff said, everything we do is public record. Everything we spend is public. It's all on our website. Our audits are on there for the last several years. We'll show you our funding. And we want to be very transparent. Okay? But as we continue to grow, it's because we've got some really good staff, we've got some folks that are working really hard, and more people are choosing Gulfport for their education, and that's great. But it gives us growing pains. Growing pains can be a little tough at times. I don't want to put modules in. I won't tell you why. They're just not as safe as obviously being able to house someone in the storm shelter area. We don't even have that. We did our tornado drills yesterday at the elementary. And they're just moving from the outside walls into the interior rooms. And then they go downstairs in that lower part. Since we closed in that door and put the doors in, now we can actually use that as a tornado space. But we don't have a shelter to go into. We shelter in place. That's what we do. That's what we've always done. You know? And we'll continue to do that. If that's what we got to do, I'm in charge of the school and looking at what we can do best. That's what we'll continue to do. And if we have this opportunity, we heard you loud and clear when folks said, write FEMA. Write it. We're doing it. We're in that process, and it's a big process. In fact, Monday we're meeting with the architect for the FEMA design portion of it. We've got the sizing that you can build now. I will report that we're significantly larger with FEMA money than we were even asking with the bond. I think we were going to build a 7,500 square foot building at the elementary for the elementary cafeteria with the original bond that we asked that failed. With the FEMA money, you can build up to 12,000 square foot. That's significantly bigger. And of course, that's what they said. Make sure you build big as you can. You're not always going to have FEMA money. You're not always going to get 75 cents on the dollar. That you only come up with 25 cents. And this allows us the opportunity to do things. So that's something that I felt like was very important. And I was, Mr. Walker's here, he's the president of our school board. We talked about this in length. We spent a lot of time thinking about what could be best that we could do. And FEMA grant writing is a big challenge. It's a tough thing to do. And I'm very pleased that Delaware County is working really hard in updating their plan, because without it, we can't get FEMA money anyway. You can't get it. So that's a big component of it.
One thing, I'll give you to be 100% transparent. I live in the Kansas School District, so I can't vote for this. But as a sheriff, I'm going to tell you, I have been involved in many, many natural disasters throughout the United States. Does anyone remember the Joplin tornado in 2009, 2010? We were one of the first ones on scene. I was a supervisory agent for our Miami office, and we went over there, and we were digging people out of Home Depot with things, because the only place they had to go, they didn't have a storm shelter, was in there in those buildings, and it collapsed on them. I watched a hospital that was sucking people out of the side of the hospital because they had nowhere to go. There again, this ties back in. We want that with our children and grandchildren, because they're the ones that's going to take care of us someday when we're not able to make the decisions to move our country in the direction we need to go.
So one thing yes sir, go ahead.
Mr. Duncan had asked a while ago how long that bond was going to be. I think 8 years was mentioned. This bond is really just for 4, right?
So
then they would come back and vote.
Right.
Another
So
bond.
it will stick on if you want, but it drops in that 50. And that's what allows us to come back in and dovetail together.
You're gonna sell, say, when is the gym done? When is it?
So the gym actually trickles down 3 more years.
Okay.
So this bar right here, 2024.
So you're adding
Really,
on there.
half of this bar is gym and half of it is new. So this should really be split, half red and half blue. And then a third blue.
We just
and two
kept the millage the same,
Yeah,
though, not.
you're adding more of
Right.
this as the gym goes down.
Exactly.
That's why,
Yep.
when, in 2010, when they done the gym, it's supposed to be a 10-year, everybody says, okay, 10 years, I'm done. Well, you sell it out, you can sell it out till 27, so it's 4 years after that before that last one goes up. That correct?
Completely, yeah, it goes right down to
Yeah.
0.
Right. So ideally, we come in right here with that FEMA portion. And there's a little bit right here to not exceed 17. And then in 2030, we've got a little bit more to not exceed 17. And then in 31, that last year, 90% of it would be the FEMA, the school's portion of that FEMA side. So that's what allows us to come in 4 years. Now, I do want to encourage everyone, there's a copy of the bond, the school bond ballot to grab on that back table, but I want to point out a couple of things. This is 8. This says 10. Why are those different? The number one factor in all of our conversations has been keep taxes where they are. We want to stay where we are. So we gave ourselves a little bit of additional leeway that if something changes next year on your tax base, can we adjust the bond in order to keep 17? So we gave ourselves a little bit of extra time. That if we need to adjust, we can, because 17, 18, that's the most important factor in this decision-making process. That was the number one instruction. Don't increase taxes over where we've been. So that last sentence that says to become due serially within 10 years, that's why we gave ourselves a little bit of flexibility to make sure that we can do that.
We can do what
Second.
we promised them to do.
Second thing it says, down towards the bottom, it says not to exceed 10%. That's a statute limit. Bonds are still selling. I sold a bond today at Claremore. The taxable rate was 4.3. Tax exempt is still in the 3.5% range. So these numbers reflect 5%. If interest rates go up to 5%, can we sell our bonds and keep our taxes flat? Yes. Today, tax exempt bonds are about 3.5. So again, we've tried to give some flexibility. Now the last thing I want to point out, nowhere on this does it say middle school classroom addition, library renovation. We're limited on how many words we can put on the ballot, a little bit different from the sales tax issue. But this is part of a 4-page document that the school board signed. That 4-page document does specify middle school addition, library renovation, and so forth. Every time we sell one of these bonds, we have to submit that 4-page document to the district attorney to review. Right, right. And that's also, it'll be printed in your newspaper, and it's on your school website. So it doesn't specify, and this side is a little different from the sales tax question, but it is in a binding legal document that gets reviewed by the DA, by the Attorney General. It also gets reviewed every year when the school goes through their annual audit. So those, I wanted to explain why there are a little bit of differences in those ballot questions. Questions I can answer on the bond, on the tax side?
I got one, Bud, don't be mad at me if it's, he's already looking.
You're supposed to leave now.
I'll just preface this by saying, I'm voting yes on this bond, no matter what, because I've been in the middle school when the bell rings. I've seen the classrooms at the elementary. I know that it's just a matter of time when something happens. However, as we've talked about this over the last few years, and when we were talking about it, the cost of materials was going up, and they've started to come down. Certain things have come down now. How will that affect the end cost? Will that affect it at all how things would change throughout our cycle.
Yeah, so that's a great question. We're voting for $1,145,000. Well, the bond issue is a vote for that dollar amount. Now, there's things about the design process and the construction process that they haven't gone in and dug soil samples where that new addition is going to go. They don't know if there's any old gas line that hasn't been discovered. So there's always some components that are a little bit variable, if you will. At the end of the day, the only authority you have is for $1,145,000. Now, if your bids come in way under budget, there's two options by statutes. One, you can go on and do other bond type items. So you can take that money, you can buy some more smart boards, you can replace some ceiling tiles, replace some flooring, anything that you could normally do with a bond, then they could do after they finish the ballot. Or you can refund it back onto the taxes. And in all my years, I've had schools that had extra money for one reason or another. I've never had one that refunded it back, because the laundry list of needs is far bigger than any dollar amount voted. But that's a local decision. Your school board gets to decide that. And that's bound by Oklahoma statute.
With new businesses and new homes being built, shouldn't that lower that also?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We did not bet on that. One of the things that we do when we plan a bond is we look at a 20-year pattern of your community financially. This isn't part of the slide because what we're trying to do is focus on the topics that are really pertinent for it. This is more of our homework before we plan the bond. But we look at a 20-year history financially of your community. Your community the last 5 years, your average growth rate is 8%. Now that doesn't mean you're hitting it every year. But for the last year, you were at 1.7. Previous to that, it was 3.8, 1.98. 2019-20, you grew 22% financially. The year before that, it was 11.5. Before that, it was 7.9, 3.5, 3.8, 2.4. So we look at a pattern. How have you been growing financially? We're saying if you only grow at 2% going forward, and historically you've been growing above that nearly every year, but if you only grow at 2% and interest rates are high, can we sell the bond and maintain that tax gain? So as you grow above that, and that's why you see just a little bit of fluctuation from year to year, because you've had years that you grew above 2%. So the millage rate may drop a half a mil, maybe 3/4 of a mil. Now we adjust every year, and as I mentioned earlier, that's why we've given ourselves some flexibility that if you don't grow, if you don't, we think you will, but if you don't, can we do this and still keep the commitment?
The trends are showing that we'll grow. The trends are showing that additional economic development. There's no guarantee. And we may slow down on our growth of children. But even if we do, I'm a science teacher, and I look at that all the time, look at charts. I mentioned that we've sped up in growth the last couple of years. So naturally,
Yeah, thanks.
It's almost too clear in here now.
So naturally, if we start to slow down, we're still going to grow for 2 or 3 years. But, that growth, but we're still going to grow. We're still going to have 60, 70, 80 more kids. If you think about that, that's 4 more classrooms. Again, that's 4 more teachers, that we're going to have. So we're nearing the biggest we've ever been in Oklahoma. There's such a difference now in how we educate kids and the supports that we have in place with them than it was 20, 30 years ago when I was a kid, in school. And how many kids are in the classroom? There's a maximum in how many kids you can actually have in a class now. And you can't exceed it, or you're penalized. They take money away, which I think that's silly. But
I got a question for you.
yes, sir.
How many teachers have you got in this school that can teach from the 1st through the 8th, modern classroom,
About 28.
every subject?
Yes, they're certified. They have a license to teach 1st through the 8th grade. Yes, about
When
28.
I got in one room, classroom, the teacher had 28 kids, and she taught from 1st through the 8th.
Wow.
Every subject. history and all. Now you're talking about the teachers being overworked.
Right. I understand what you're saying. I definitely do.
That's what people work.
Well taken. Any other questions? I don't keep you all night, but I'm happy to talk to anyone about anything. And even if it's off bond subject, I'm happy to talk to anybody about anything, anytime. Well, I feel like you're educated on this bond. I just ask one thing. Talk to your neighbors about it. And I want you to vote the way you want to vote. I'm not asking you to vote yes or no. That's not for me to decide. Everybody's going to vote the way they want to vote on this. But I'd love for you to educate. You've come up here, and I appreciate you've come. And you've been educated on it. I'd like you to talk to your neighbors about it. And let them know what you found out. And then they can decide whether they want to support it or not, whether they want to keep their taxes the same. And then we will be able to do this with our middle school. And talk to them about that we're writing the FEMA grant. The school is, you can go back and look at the minutes of our board meeting and see where we've hired them and the meetings that we've had. So we're writing the FEMA grants. They will be submitted, guaranteed. So that's something to look forward to. You know, hopefully we get a letter during the next couple of 3 years saying that we've been approved for our FEMA grants. And then we can look for ways then where we can make those happen for our kids. That'll be a really big thing. Things are looking different around Gulfport Public Schools. They have for several years now. We've been trying to continue to improve, make things safer. I know that things change. We never thought we'd have security guards, SROs that are as important as a biology teacher, as important as learning math. We kind of feel that way now. Having law enforcement on campus, to me now, is as important as having a biology teacher. So that's something that we will continue to work hard on to make sure our kids are safe. And, we live in Oklahoma. And the weather is something that's unpredictable. That's one thing that is predictable, is that the weather is going to be unpredictable here. So Mary can talk to you about Tornado Alley and how that patterns have been beginning to change. They're still strong. Used to, they'd be out in western Oklahoma, be really strong, and they'd dissipate by the time they got to eastern Oklahoma. But that's starting to change a little bit. They're still packing a punch by the time they get to us. And that's concerning.
A month ago, wasn't it? The straight winds come through over here, not very far from the school, and was just destroying everything out here. They could have very, very easily, they came by my house real close. Could have very easily turned into a tornado during the day if it would have been kids in this school.
Those storm shelters will be for the community too, not just our kids and staff. So know that. That's the way we're having to do things. I want to make that. It's
I can say one thing, you're having a lot better luck with FEMA than I did when that tornado come through. They wouldn't give me a damn thing.
Thank y'all. Appreciate you very much.